Welcome back. You're watching the Jacksonville History Show. Our guest in this segment is Neil McGinnis, author of The Beaches, A History and Tour. Welcome.
Harry, how are you?
Okay.
Great.
Interesting book, and I was very eager to have you on the show and to talk about it.
I'm flattered.
Beaches is an interesting part of Jacksonville and Jacksonville's history, and we've got a lot of photos to take a look at.
We do.
Let's go to the photos.
I've got a small sampler.
Okay.
What we have here first is just the cover of the book, and what I've tried to capture is all the different communities at the beaches on the southern tip of the island, Vilano Beach, all the way up going north to Mayport.
And all that's covered in your book.
It is.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that most people don't think they actually live on an island. But it's a 37-mile long barrier island with no name.
Sure.
Now, not to go into ancient history, but 12,000 years ago, mankind crossed the land bridge up near Alaska and Siberia, and it took them 6,500 years to make it to Florida. But the earliest signs of mankind on the East Coast are actually right in Atlantic Beach at Dutton Island, and this is an aerial of Dutton Island. In the background, you can see the Wonderwood Bridge to the north. Fast forward an awful lot of years to 1492, to Columbus coming to this part of the world, and the people who followed him explored the Caribbean and found an awful lot of gold and silver and started sending shiploads back. They were trying to balance their budget.
Right.
And but there were a lot of pirates and privateers, and so one of the military tacticians and strategists, Pedro Menendez, established a waypoint, a way station at St. Augustine in 1565. First he had to kill off some French at Fort Caroline who had gotten there just a little before him and established a colony. The Spanish weren't too happy about it. Number one, they weren't Spanish. Number two, they were Huguenots and not Roman Catholics. And so they massacred them all and took over Fort Caroline. Then they built forts at the mouth of the St. Johns River on the south side where Mayport is today, Fort San Esteban, and the north side at Fort George is Fort San Gabriel. And then they had started establishing missions up and down the coast, with one of the first ones being San Juan del Puerto mission right there at Fort George. Another mission that is down the Guana Peninsula, 1587. This is a picture of what a typical mission looked like on the left, but this is an aerial photo taken from the south looking up the coast, so that's A1A on the right, and that is the Guana Peninsula, and that was the site of a Spanish mission from 1587 till 1702. 1702, the British came through, moving down the coast, and killed all the Christians and Spanish at all the missions, mass genocide. And that included killing all the people out in central Florida where there was a large cattle ranch that provided the beef to St. Augustine. They were replaced, that cattle ranch was replaced by Don Diego Espinosa, who established a cattle ranch at the beaches. And basically, this line here is Michler Road at the beach, and the top here is Mayport. The line goes all the way out. His land went all the way out to what is today's Kings Highway. So this was a 60,000-acre cattle ranch that provided beef for St. Augustine. And notice that there's a land bridge, so the cattle went back and forth. This was before the beaches was an island. Following that, the British took over the beaches and took over Florida. And of course, we had the Revolutionary War. A Revolutionary War hero named John McQueen came to Florida and accumulated 25,000 acres of land and built a few homes. One is the Kingsley Plantation, which most people know about and may have visited, up on Fort George. That was actually McQueen's house. He built it in 1791. He liked the house so much that he built a mirror image of it, scaled up a little bit, at Queens Harbor. The remnants are not there today, but on the right is an artist's conception of McQueen's house overlooking the intersection of the St. Johns River and the Intracoastal, or San Pablo River, at today's Queens Harbor. Now, most people wonder where the name Pablo came from. San Pablo was a mission back in the 1500s, but this is an 1863 map. I don't know if we can focus in on the circle here in the bottom right, but it basically shows the beaches, our island, being split in two, north-south, with the western part being called Pablo and the eastern part being called Hazard with two Z's. So this was before the railroads, before the towns, before Jacksonville Beach and Atlantic Beach. This is 1863. There's a long history about why they're named that, and I won't take the time right now, but the whole focus before the railroads was north-south along the waterways, because that was the way you traveled. There was very little focus east-west. The railroads came to this country in the 1830s, got to Jacksonville in the 1850s, and in the 1880s, 3 different rail lines were run from St. Augustine and from Jacksonville going west to east to the beaches. So in the bottom right, there was the St. Augustine and North Beach Railway, and that is the train station right on the beach, no longer there, of course, at the site of today's Reef Restaurant, right near the Gate Food Post. That was a large railroad stop. In the top right is the Pablo Beach, Jacksonville Beach train station, which is was right on the site of today's Historical Center. On the top left is the Atlantic Beach Railroad Station, which would be about 8th Street and Ocean in Atlantic Beach, and that served the Continental Hotel. In the middle here is the Mayport train station, and the first train that came to Mayport was from Arlington, came down what's today's Wonderwood Expressway. Wonderwood was built on the old railroad bed. And there was a second line that came from the south from Pablo Beach. And then there was actually a town called East Mayport, and that had a train station. That Mayport, much of Mayport and all of East Mayport became the Navy base in the late 40s. Flagler had established some very large luxury hotels in St. Augustine in the 1880s, and Flagler built the one on the right here in 1901. This is from 7th to 10th Street along the ocean in Atlantic Beach.
Wow.
Back in 1901, it had a 6-story rotunda.
Yeah.
It was extraordinary. And then John Christopher built the Murray Hall Hotel. Actually, this was 1886 in Jacksonville Beach, both rather elaborate and grand. The Murray Hall had a fireplace in every room. Unfortunately, 2 years later, it burned down. I guess one of the guests wasn't too careful.
That's what you get with all those fireplaces, I guess, yeah.
But both of those structures fell to fire and were not replaced. So the beaches didn't get the grand structures after this. We did need roadways. People were tired of coming by steamboat and by smaller boats.
And by train.
And by train.
Yeah.
Exactly. And on the left, Atlantic Boulevard was finished in 1910, and then in 1925 it became the largest concrete road in the southeast. And on the right is State Road A1A being built by Ben McCormick with wagon teams of mules, and the mules did all the grading, 1928. With all the focus on transportation and wealth and luxury, there was a desire to improve the navigation and also to make way for the luxury yachts going up and down from Florida to New York. And so the Flagler Canal Company was hired to connect the San Pablo River on the north, on the right, with the Talamado River on the left or on the south, and a 10-mile long man-made canal was dug, which created what's today the Intracoastal Waterway, and it was this in 1912 that actually made the beaches an island. So we're coming up on our centennial as an island. Here you have on the bottom, on the left, the dredging equipment and the early bridges. This top right is the barge bridge, the second bridge there. The drawbridge, the third bridge in 1937 that many people will remember, and of course the big concrete span that was built in the 2000s is what's there today. Further south on the island, Vilano Beach had always been kind of a day trip for people out of St. Augustine. It was very hard to get to. And the Capos and the Usinas started bringing people over by boat, and then once they got to the intracoastal, to the river's edge, they had to get them across the island or across the spit of land to the beach, and they had horse-drawn carriages. So this is a horse-drawn tram that took people from the river to the ocean, where there were casinos with dancing and bathing. You'd change into your bathing suit and then have dinner and dance. But it was all focused on a day trip, not overnight accommodations. Sinclair Lewis, right next to the Surfside casino, rented a house for many, many years and wrote all of his famous books, including Elmer Gantry, at 177 Surfside, which is still standing. Here's a shot that we got from the Yale Library of Sinclair Lewis in the living room next to the coquina fireplace, and you'll notice how high his waist is. That was the 1916 style. Early Ponte Vedra, everybody's heard of the club, the Ponte Vedra Inn and Club, but way before the club, there was the Bonnie Doon Lodge in 1919, and that was the only place to stay out there. In 1928, the Log Cabin Clubhouse was built. 1937, a much larger clubhouse. They also, at the top of the Guana, had a hunting lodge, and here's an early picture of that hunting lodge where they advertised the game for different seasons. And actually, the Guana Peninsula, the northern part of it, is still used for hunting today. Meanwhile, as the Jacksonville Beach and Atlantic Beach moved away from luxury hotels, Jacksonville Beach focused more, or Pablo Beach, Jacksonville Beach, focused more on the middle class, on the average person, and with all kinds of games, all kinds of rides, and of course the roller coaster built in the 1920s.
And it was a major tourist destination.
Oh, it was, during World War I and World War II, and for the people of Jacksonville. But you can see the plane in the top right, top left rather, and that really is the beginnings of World War II and the United States entrance into it. In the late 30s, the U.S. Navy decided to build a major facility at Mayport and took over the Wonderwood by the Sea Resort, a large resort. In fact, there's a recent book just focused on that takeover. That's quite interesting. And then by the 50s, in the lower left here, we had 3 carriers. And this is, I think, 1953. So just to orient you, the right photo is the entrance to the St. Johns River taken from the ocean. The white lines on each side are the jetties, which are still there today. And on the left, the opening, the bay there, is the carrier basin, where carriers have, since the 1950s, been located, and hopefully in 2014 will be again. I threw a couple of pictures in that are not often seen, and maybe a little touch of Broadway. In the middle on the top is an old photo that I had restored of the Osterreicher family in 1901. They settled at near an area called 20 Mile. It wasn't actually on the beach, but it was the main road between Fort Caroline and St. Augustine. In the top left, and difficult to see, is Ben McCormick, who married one of the Osterreicher daughters. And he built A1A, he built much of the Navy base, and his family continued on with that. On the right, we have Rhoda Martin, who moved to Jacksonville in the late 1800s and started the first school for colored children and the first black church in the area known as the Hill at Jacksonville Beach. And the old brick school that was the first school for colored children at the beach it was moved and has become a cultural center honoring her at Jack's Beach. Bottom left, we have a socialite, Bobby Jacobs, out at the beach throwing one of his regular parties, and with him is Ethel Merman.
Neil, we're almost out of time. I wanted to give you an opportunity. You can find the book in most local independent
Yes,
bookstores.
pretty much all of the independent bookstores in the area, including Fernandina and St. Augustine and Jacksonville, are carrying the book. And of course, the Beaches Historical, Jacksonville Historical, and the Ponte Vedra Inn and Club.
Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Harry.
And that's our show for tonight. For more information about Jacksonville history, www.jackshistory.com or call 665-0064. So long, everyone.